Hello, and welcome to Democracy for America's Political Revolution Night School. I'm Charles Chamberlain, Executive Director of DFA, and tonight we'll dig deep in how to build your voter targeting plan. We'll cover organizing math and what it means to work towards a reflective democracy. And we'll get to hear from Steve Phillips, our special guest trainer and author of the book, Brown is the New White, How the Demographic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority. Right now, DFA members are joining this call, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. So please stay on the line. Hello, and welcome to Democracy for America's Political Revolution Night School. I'm Charles Chamberlain, Executive Director of DFA, and tonight we'll dig deep in how to build your voter targeting plan. We'll cover organizing math and what it means to work towards a reflective democracy. And we'll get to hear from Steve Phillips, our special guest trainer and author of the book, Brown is the New White, How the Demographic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority. Right now, DFA members from across the country are joining this call, and we'll get started in just a minute. So please stay on the line. Hello, and welcome to Democracy for America's Political Revolution Night School. I'm Charles Chamberlain, Executive Director of Democracy for America, and tonight we'll dig deep in how to build your voter targeting plan. And we'll get to hear from Steve Phillips, our special guest trainer and author of the new book, Brown is the New White. Right now, DFA members are joining this call. Nationwide, over 3,800 people signed up. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, so please stay on the line. Hello, and welcome to Democracy for America's Political Revolution Night School. I'm Charles Chamberlain, Executive Director of DFA, and tonight we'll dig deep in how to build your voter targeting plan. We'll cover organizer math and what it means to work towards a reflective democracy. And we'll get to hear from Steve Phillips, our special guest trainer and author of the new book, Brown is the New White, How the Demographic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority. Right now, DFA members are joining this call, and we'll get started in just a few seconds. Thank you, and stay on the line. All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Charles Chamberlain, Executive Director of Democracy for America. This is DFA's Political Revolution Night School, the interactive, engaging training program designed to build up key campaign skills in field organizing, media, fundraising, storytelling, and more. Tonight's session, we'll dig deep in how to build your voter targeting plan. We'll cover organizer math and what it means to work towards a reflective democracy, and we'll get to hear from our special guest trainer, Steve Phillips. But first, this is an interactive training, and I want to make sure you know how to get the most out of it. You can follow along tonight's training and view the PowerPoint slide presentation online at democracyforamerica.com/training now. We'll have two short sections to take live questions tonight. If you'd like to ask a question during the call, please press 0 on your phone, and you'll be connected with a DFA staff member. Again, please press 0 when you're ready to ask a question tonight. And if you're listening to this call on our website at democracyforamerica.com/training, you can also submit a question through the live web stream on your right. Now tonight, we'll hear from DFA expert trainers Mondell Robinson on how to target voters and build your path to victory. We'll hear from Ruby Reed on developing vote goals and win numbers. And we'll take live questions from you. But our first trainer tonight is a special guest. Steve Phillips is the author of Brown is the New White, How the Demographic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority. Steve Phillips is a leader, a civil rights lawyer, and a senior fellow at the Center of American Progress. Steve founded Democracy in Color, a multimedia magazine on race, politics, and the new American majority. He doesn't just talk about running for office, he's done it and won. In 1992, he became the youngest person ever elected to public office in San Francisco and went on to serve as president of the Board of Education. He is co-founder of PowerPAC, a social justice organization dedicated to building a multiracial political coalition. And once again, putting training into action, PowerPAC conducted the largest independent voter mobilization efforts, backing and winning elections for Barack Obama, Cory Booker, and Kamala Harris, to name just a few. Steve's book, Brown is the New White is a searing indictment of the Democratic Party and a compelling action for the entire progressive movement that takes an unvarnished look at the history of whites and people of color in America and reveals how the past has created current conditions that have revolutionary implications for U.S. politics in 2016 and beyond. Tonight, Steve will explain on what it means to fight for a reflective democracy, expose the problem, and share the vision on how to fix it. And with that, I'd like to welcome Steve Phillips to the call. Steve, are you ready to roll?
Ready to roll.
Excellent. Take it away.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on the call, and I really just want to thank all of you for being there and to really commend everybody for your interest in running for office. And as Charles had mentioned, I was a young elected official back in the day in very similar circumstances, I think, in terms of coming out of the Rainbow Coalition and Jesse Jackson's very inspiring campaign, helped me to understand politics and get committed to making change. And a number of us went from that experience to running for office. And so we ran citywide in San Francisco. I had a whole team who were new to politics but passionate and inspired. We knocked down 12,000 doors across the city of San Francisco. Used my Mac Plus and 20 meg hard drive to send follow-up letters to each of the people, and then we were actually able, through going door to door, knocking on doors, identifying voters, and getting those folks out to actually win. And that experience really is what led me towards writing my book, in that I came out of the Rainbow Coalition, which was directly connected to the Civil Rights Movement, and actually led to Jackson going from 400 delegates and 3.5 million votes to 7 million votes, and I saw the potential of a coalition of progressive people of color in terms of being able to transform politics in this country. So I always believed from the 80s until over the number of years that actually could be a powerful force, and that when Obama won, and this is why I actually opened up my book around with the experience of Jesse Jackson crying in Grant Park at the night of Obama's victory, and tying that back to Jesse Jackson having been there when Dr. King assassinated. In the span of those 40 years' life, we saw the country go through this profound transformation where this great civil rights leader struck down, and then 4 years later you have the country electing an African American. And I thought it was clear that there was this new majority, that we had numbers and we now have the power to be able to elect, and then even more significantly in 2012, re-elect a person of color as the President of the United States. Obama got 5 million fewer white votes in 2012 than he did in 2008, but he was still able to go on and win. So it seemed clear to me that we needed to keep moving in this direction, inspiring people, mobilizing people, validating there are in fact more progressive whites than people realize, and certainly enough when in partnership with people of color to win elections. But that really was not the conventional wisdom within too much to Democratic Party politics. And Democratic Party politics still is, even to this day, and this is, I think, one of the central battles within the progressive movement Democratic Party. What direction are we going to go in? And who are the most important voters that we're going to prioritize? And the central premise of my book, which really is, I think, based on the data from the elections of the past 8 years, where we won when we increased turnout in 2008 and 2012. We lost when people were uninspired and didn't come out in 2010 and 2014. That the path to victory is in inspiring and bringing out the turnout. That if you use the metrics of the Obama election, there is in fact a demonstrable mathematical majority, which they're calling the American majority, of progressive whites and people of color. 39% of whites, 80% of people of color, is 51% of the eligible voter population in this country. So then the question is, when you're putting a campaign, who are you targeting? And that, I think, is a battle. And I even think that we've made some progress in that regard, but it still is a challenge, and it still is not the conventional wisdom. And too many of the consultants continue to rely on running 30-second ads, targeting the swing voters, who they feel are the most important voters, spending their money on persuasion rather than on mobilization. There's just two examples that I will share with you, and then we can have a Q&A a little bit. From the book that I talk about, a chapter talks about invest wisely. And so one example was in North Carolina when, in 2014, when Kay Hagan's seat was up, and it was the top target for Democrats to try to protect that seat. The outside groups alone spent $19 million in negative television ads targeting Tom Tillis, trying to persuade those who were going to go vote that he was a bad guy. That same $19 million could have paid for 400 full-time organizers going door to door, doing calls, contacting people, and if each of them turned out 3 additional voters per week with 2 weeks off for vacation, we would have won that race. And so that's an example of a different type of allocation of resources and priority around persuasion versus mobilization. And then lastly, the example of what Keith Ellison has shown in his congressional races in Minnesota is that you can actually increase out even in off years. But he doesn't do it by running television ads and trying to persuade those who are the so-called frequent voters, but who actually are not dependable. He goes after the progressive voters. He invests in staff. There's a lot of renters in his district in Minnesota, so he has people doing organizing, going into tenant buildings, doing door-to-door identification. He's got a Souls to the Polls program, picking up black voters, taking them to churches, taking from churches to the polls. That type of work has demonstrably shown that he has increased turnout in each off year, from 6 to 10 to 14. At the same time, the turnout has gone down within Minnesota and nationally. So that shows that we have this majority. It can be turned out, but it requires a smart and intelligent allocation of resources and campaign plan that is focused in on identifying your supporters, mobilizing your voters, and spending less time, resources, and energy on the persuasion, which is what most of politics is about right now. And I think that this really is the battle facing us as the progressives and really for the Democratic Party. And I think it's great that Donna Brazile is now chair of the party. She comes out of coalition experience that I was, and shares this viewpoint. But it's not the dominant view, and that's going to be part of the battle for all of us who are progressive, is to move the party in this direction. So that's a little bit I wanted to share in terms of the lessons, I think, as you guys look at going through this training, and it'd be great to have a couple questions.
Steve, that's great. Thank you so much for that. I think you make some questions we got online in advance of this was, if you could, are there some examples of campaigns that are doing the best job to engage the new American majority cycle?
That's the Democracy in Color website. We've got a politics election 2016 tab, and we've done some report cards on the Senate campaign. So this is particularly important for the Senate races, and people do not appreciate that it's not enough to just demonize Trump to win over the horrified moderate Republicans. That's not going to get us the Senate seats. That there are 7 seats Obama won. The only way to get those seats is to bring out the Obama coalition. And even if someone's voting against Trump, that doesn't mean they're voting against their Republican senator. So we did this report card on a number of the Senate campaigns. One of the best and most encouraging ones was Catherine Cortez Masto in they're really hiring and utilizing pollsters and consultants and ad people who are really targeting the new American majority and building their campaign in that regard. Another campaign which is making some progress in that direction is Ann Kirkpatrick in Arizona, that she's quite connected to and knowledgeable about and trying to work with the Native American community, which is sizable in Arizona and a significant part of the population that's often overlooked. So I would say that those are 2 examples of campaigns that are more encouraging.
That's fantastic here, especially considering that Catherine Cortez is a DFA endorsed state. It's something that we're working hard with to make sure that she wins in November. Before I go to a first live question, I do want to make sure that everyone on this call knows that if you'd like to ask a question, you can press 0 on your phone now, and you'll be connected with a DFA staff member. Again, please press 0 when you're ready to ask a question, and you'll be connected directly to a staff member to review call. If you're listening to this call on our website at democracyforamerica.com/training, you can also submit a question through the live stream on your right. With that, I'd like to bring in our first live caller. Jason is calling in and has a great question for you. Jason, are you there? Well, it looks like we maybe have trouble connecting Jason on the line, so I'll ask you his question for him. He asked if anyone looked into how the quality of data available differs when speaking of demographics in low-income neighborhoods versus majority neighborhoods.
Well, that's a good question overall. Now, one of the things that is very surprising, if not shocking, is the poor quality data, particularly when it gets to the racial demographics. And the most prominent example of that was the New York Times. Nate Silver ran this big old piece talking about there are more white voters than people think, and which was not accurate in actually face of all the census data, but he was trying to anomalies in the data, and I don't think he even really understood the difference between some of the complexities around how Latinos are classified in the census, and use this to paint a whole picture around. So all we really have at the larger levels, exit polls, census data, and some level of the voter file data. So the point being that the quality of data is not that good, period, and that flies in the face of a lot of the assumption that we're such a high-tech society and that we've got all these technological tools and firepower, which on the one hand we do, but it's not being applied to really understanding the racial demographics of the society. So I think that that's something you have to push for and demand from people doing data work around, is holding them more accountable. And I have this example in the book of this woman, Raida Hamida, an Arab American Muslim in Orange County, who was trying to get a voter list of Arabs and Muslims in Orange County, California, which is, has more than 1 million people in the county. She was given a list of 5 people. She went in with her knowledge on how to look at the data. She identified like 75,000 people. And so there's totally a need to show competence, and we can't be deferential to the data people in terms of thinking they know everything. I continue to push them to apply those tools and those techniques to the country's racial demographics.
Excellent. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. All right, well, let's go to Alex, who we have been calling in from Atlanta, Georgia. Alex, are you there? Well, we seem to be having continual technical difficulties tonight, so instead I'm going to ask his question for him again. So in this case, he's wondering if there are any, do you have any specific strategy for white candidates running in majority African-American districts?
I do think that it would behoove people, I think, to look closely and go back and look at the New York mayor's race. And in terms of Bill de Blasio was able to do in when he ran for mayor and generated a lot of enthusiasm across the racial spectrum, even as a white candidate. And I asked people who were from New York what they thought about that, or what they attributed that to. And so part of it, a little bit of it, he has a mixed race family with a son with an awesome afro. But more important, people were saying, it's the stance he took on the issues. He was very strong on the police brutality, police accountability issues. He was very strong on economic inequality, and that resonated deeply. So I think the issue set being validated, speaking to and connecting to the issues that people actually care about. And it is important to have validators and endorsers from the community. I remember I ran for office the first time that I was new to the city of San Francisco as well, in the city 2 years. I spent much of the first couple months just going around with my notebook and sitting and meeting with people and listening to them and having them tell me about the issues and taking notes and educating me. And so that kind of effort in the communities from the community leaders will both deepen your knowledge, also strengthen the potential support of folks who can then go out and vouch for you and be validators.
That's excellent. That makes a lot of sense. One final question, Steve. It seems so critically important, and you mentioned that Donna Brazile has taken over the DNC and that's a positive thing, but it seems like the Democratic Party has been extremely slow to pick up on the ideas on how to focus on the new American majority. What do you think we need to make it so that they're running the stronger campaigns and actually looking to new targeting and paying attention to it?
Well, I think this is the battle and the struggle. This is the moment. And so in terms of there being a new chair, there's going to be an appointment of a new chair, and then all the other committees, the FCC and the Senate races, the DCCC and the House race, the BGA and the governors, those normally take place out of public view. Somebody gets appointed, then they hire a staff person, and then they staff up. And the worldview of those people has tended to be much more about how do we go after these white swing voters rather than how do we invest in, take a lot of the Howard Dean principles, the 50-state strategy. So I think all of us need to be vigilant and active around putting pressure on, particularly the DNC is going to be an opportunity where there's going to be an actual election, but setting forward a set of criteria and principles around what we want these positions to do. They spend $500 million even in the off-year elections, and so we have insisting that the leadership that takes that money is not just wasting it on these ineffective television ads, but is building permanent infrastructure in cities and states across the country.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense. Well, you know, the points you're making and the data that backs it all up is absolutely critical for candidates, campaigns, and consultants to learn if we're going to build and win the political revolution in November and beyond. So I want to thank you, Steve, so much for participating in this call and giving us your expert advice. You really had a lot. To say anything at all to close up real quick before I move on to the next section of the training?
Go forth and change the world. It's energetic people who come into politics through inspiring campaigns, who stay involved, who are what is necessary to transform the party from the ground up. And so I'm really excited what everybody's doing. So many people are on this call, and go forth and change the world.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I also want to thank everyone participating and asking questions. And if you have a question and you'd like to ask during the next Q&A, remember you can press 0 on your phone. You'll be connected with a DFA staff member. Now, I'd like to introduce Ruby Reed from the team here at DFA Path to Victory. Michael, are you ready to take it away?
Charlie, I am. Thank you so much. I want to also thank Steve for his great knowledge. And also I want to thank everybody else that's joining us this evening. I want to remind everybody that this is the beginning of a great political revolution, and I don't say those words lightly, for I know the moment will only be revolutionary if we seize it. And in order for us to seize it, we must work. We must work harder, we must work longer, and we must work more efficiently. In electoral campaigning and in organizing in general, there's no way to be more efficient with your time, your people, your money, than beginning your campaign with an accurate win number. Every successful campaign must start with a win number. The win number is your guiding star. It is your compass, your map to victory. Quite simply, your win number is the number of votes you need to get elected. And to explain this concept of win number and how to calculate a win number, I'm going to turn it over to Ruby Reed, our very own win number wizard. Ruby, take it.
Thank you so much, everyone who's on this call. I'm really excited to elect the progressive revolution together with you. So tonight I'm here to talk about two of my favorite things, winning elections and voter math. So if you want to win your election, you need to do the math so you can figure out how many voters you really need in order to win. Once you know how many voters you need to win and how many people in your base you can reasonably expect to turn out, then you can develop your strategy to contact the additional voters and bring them into the fold. So from there, you'll be able to determine what kind of outreach you need to do with voters in your district in order to win. But I'm just going to talk pretty quickly tonight about the very first most important piece of that whole process, which is calculating your win number. So every other goal and metric on your campaign is derived from a single all-encompassing crucial number, which is your win number. It's the most important metric goal, and every leader on your campaign and the candidate, you all should know exactly what your win number is, and you should know how you calculated it, why you got there, and you should know how far you are from hitting it right now. So calculating your win number using the model we're going to talk about tonight is a blend of art and math and science. It's a little bit of magic, so I invite you to be really creative in this process. You're going to do some research. You're going to be able to tailor this model to fit your unique situation because every election is a little bit of a special snowflake. And most importantly, I hope that this training tonight will really inspire you to dig more deeply into the numbers and the statistics that can help you understand your voters better and inform your strategy so you can win. So the basic model we're going to talk about tonight is very user-friendly. Even if you don't like math, I promise it will not hurt. It will be great. And we're also going to share a really fantastic tool after this training that will basically do all the math for you. It's a win number calculator. So we wanted to give you an overview of how win numbers work and why they're important and what they're all about. But tonight that can inform this critical field decisions, strategy decisions that you're making on your campaigns. And they're going to work best if you have kind of a basic framework. So that's what we're going to cover on this call. So you'll be able to fine-tune the model and make it fit your specific situation. So I wanted to first start out by defining two important terms. We'll be talking about these a lot in the next few minutes. So they are win number and win percentage. So a win number is the actual number of votes that you need in order to win. So for example, my win number is 127. That means I need 127 people to vote for me in order to win in this election. So a win percentage is similar, but it's the proportion of votes that you need to win. So I need 51% of the votes in order to win this election. So we'll use those both a lot, win number and win percentage. And they'll come to be some of your favorite numbers. So before you start even calculating any of those numbers or doing any math at all, you're going to start with research. So you got to gather the numbers before you can crunch them. So you'll want to actually block out a good deal of time to go through past election results and help you understand a lot more about the electorate that you're working with and how they behaved in the past. Now, people can always do something different than what they did before, but one of the things that we can definitely look at is, how has this electorate behaved in different elections and different over time. So that's where we're starting from. So I'm going to give a quick summary on how to calculate your win number, and then I'll give you some parameters for the research that you'll need to do before you get started. And just as a reminder, we are going to send you a link to that win number calculator from our friends at Wellstone Action. So that's the online calculator tool that will let you just type in all these numbers that we're going to talk about, and it will calculate your win number for you. So for step one, diving into the research, here are some really good tips for selecting prior elections that you can use for comparison. You want to look at several different elections, not just the last election that happened, but 2 or 3 or even more. Depending on your situation, the more information you have, the better you're going to understand the dynamics in your district. So you're going to use this information to help you determine your win number. So for example, if you're running for a city council, you probably want to look at the last 2 or 3 city council results for your district and see how many turned out and who they voted for and all that kind of stuff. That's going to be really important for you. So you want to go straight to the source to get the accurate election results that you're looking for. So depending on your state, you can usually get election results through the Secretary of State or a county or local registrar of voters office. And a lot of places you can just download it directly from their website, but sometimes you might need to give someone a call, right? To call someone at the county clerk or the city clerk and be able to get the prior election results for your local races. A couple of quick guidelines. You want to look at, like I said, 2 or 3 elections, not just one. If you or the person who's running has ever been on the ballot before, you definitely want to look at those prior results, particularly if you're running for the same office because you ran last time and you almost made it, and this time you're absolutely determined that you're going to do it, right? Like, props to you if you're in that situation, and that is good to have because you know how the election responded before. So that's super helpful, but you don't want to only look at that. You still want to pick out 2 or 3 similar elections. It's going to help you get a much clearer picture of what's going on with your voters. I also want to mention that the expected electorate changes a lot depending on who and what are at the top of the ballot, right? So during presidential election year, or when the governor's up or the Senate seat is up in a state, voters oftentimes behave differently than they do when those top ticket things are different. So that can have an effect on the electorate when it comes to local elections. because who's at the polls is just very different. So if you're running this year, a presidential election year, you want to make sure that you're looking at past election results that include presidential election years. And I would actually recommend going back as far as 2004. So you'd have 2004, 2008, and 2012 as part of your win number calculations. So the same goes for U.S. Senate or governor, any other statewide office or big ticket sort of thing that is a big deal in your area. You'll know what things might be for your particular locality. But if you're running for local office on the same ballot as the U.S. Senate or governor, then you want to look at similar elections for U.S. Senate or governor as it pertains to you. You also want to compare primary election to primary election and general election to a general election. The rates of turnout are so different. It's folks that are voting for different reasons and all this. There are a lot of dynamics that would make it really hard to project accurately primary turnout based on a general election or vice versa. You also, if you're running in a special election, this probably doesn't relate to a ton of folks, but special elections really are special. It's very hard to match them with other similar prior elections. So I have a couple of tips, and I also wanted to let you know that if you are running in a special election, you're having a hard time even figuring out where to start looking for prior election results, you can reach out at training@democracyforamerica.com, and we'll help you figure it out because it is a little complicated. But generally speaking, what you're going to do is just do the best you can to find reasonable prior elections that are similar to yours in some way, and you're going to use those as a basis for comparison with your current political climate and the specifications of your race, and that's how you're going to come up with your win number and all of your glorious plans that come from the win number. So you can kind of buffer unknown factors, right? If you're looking at a bunch of prior elections and none of them are exactly quite similar, maybe the district lines changed a lot, or it's a new district that you're in, or there's something that makes it challenging to find perfectly awesome matched election results to look at. You can do a bunch of things to make it more accurate and more helpful. So buffering unknown factors by doing things like assuming that fewer voters or more voters turn out and planning accordingly. Calculating multiple different scenarios for your win number. So you could calculate two different win numbers, one that's based on a really, really low turnout and one that's based on a higher than expected turnout. And you could even calculate out like the lowest turnout ever that has ever been in this district and the highest and calculate based on those. So you can do a lot of things to learn about what the parameters are that make sense for your win number. So beyond just adjusting for turnout, you can also set your win percentage, right? The percentage of folks that you actually vote that you need to win. And set your win percentage so that your goal is to actually get a lot more votes than the minimum that you'd need for a simple majority, right? So instead of aiming to just win 51% of the vote, hey, why not aim for a landslide of 60% or 70 or more? So you want to aim for a large margin of victory because that gives you a huge win if you're able to accomplish your goals, and you have a lot of wiggle room in case your projections are a little bit off. So you can also just simply round up your win number. When it pops out of the calculator, you can decide, you know what, I want to feel a little bit less nervous when I sleep at night. I want to have a little more buffer and try to win by a bigger margin. So there are two steps in the process of crunching the numbers and getting your win number to come out. So again, the win number calculator is going to do this for you. So I'm just going to quickly understand what that calculator is actually doing. So we've collected all the facts about prior election turnout, and now we're ready to do some math. So we're going to calculate the number of voters that we expect to vote in this election. And keep in mind, you don't have to do this on paper right now. You're going to want to enter into the calculator how many people voted in your comparison sections. It'll let you enter in up to 3. You can only, if you only have one, then you can enter 1 or 2 or 3. What are the total number of registered voters for each of those elections? And then how many voters are currently registered in your district? So the calculator will do the math for you, and basically it will turn around your currently registered voters times the average turnout percentage for those different elections, and that gives you the projected turnout. So that is step number 1 of calculating your win number. Projected turnout provides a rough estimate of how many people are likely to vote in your election, so you'll use this percentage in the next step when you complete your win number calculations. So now that you know how many people to expect at the polls, how many of them do we need to win the election? It's important to talk now about the win percentage, right? So if there's only 2 candidates in your race, then you're going to need 50% of the votes. That's 1 person to win. So you would multiply that 50% plus 1 to the projected turnout, and that's how many voters you would need to win. So the calculator will do that for you again, and of course it assumes that your projected turnout calculations are correct that you did in step 1. But your win number is based on the percentage of votes that are needed to win. So the percentage might be different if you're running against multiple competitors, right? If you're running against 4 people, then it wouldn't be 50 plus 1, it would be 25 plus 1. If that is confusing to anybody, I'm happy to follow up with you guys one-on-one if you're running in races against more than 1 competitor. So the next slide we're going to show has a bunch of numbers on it. Don't worry about taking it all with you, so you can take a closer look at your leisure after the training. But briefly, what it's showing you is a chart that has 6 precincts, and those precincts are all in a district, and it includes all of the numbers that we just talked about. So it's displayed by precinct, so you can see like for each of the precincts and the district totals at the bottom. The current voter registration numbers, what the past turnout looks like, what the percentage the campaign needs to win, so their win percentage, and either 50 plus 1, simple majority, or a comfortable margin of 52%. And of course, it shows the resulting win numbers in the formulas. So I hope that gives a good idea of how you can lay out the information once you've gathered it, so you can actually use that data to inform important decisions that are going to guide your campaign strategy and goals. So my best pro tip is to always round up your number, just at least a little bit. So the win number calculator is going to give you a number, and you're going to be like, oh, goodness, that's a lot of votes I need to get, oh dear. And then I'm going to tell you to round it up. And there's a really lot of good reasons for why you would want to do that. And we're going to talk about a couple of them right now, and then we'll wrap up. So pretty much all of the techniques I'm about to discuss boil down to increasing your win number after it comes out of the calculator. So for an election where all I need is to win a simple majority, that 50% plus 1, I would generally inflate my winning the percent of votes I want to win to at least 52% or more. That would increase my win number by increasing my win percentage. I would do that just to be on the safe side because I'm nervous to aim to win by just 1 vote. It's just a really tight margin of victory, and I like to aim for a more comfortable margin. So the other reason is you can win a landslide if you aim for an ambitious, attainable win number and you actually build the capacity to meet your goals. So inflating or increasing your win number when it comes out of the calculator actually provides a lot of buffer for you in case voter turnout is different than what you thought it would be, in case more people turn out than you thought, or more of your voters stayed home than you anticipated. You can still win. You've built a really strong program around a landslide win number, and then, it becomes a win by the skin of your teeth instead of a landslide, but hey, at least you still won. On the flip side, if you don't evaluate multiple possible outcomes and you don't build in some buffer and you leave the win number as just like, okay, I'm going to win by that 1 person, you're pretty close to the edge, and you can see an outcome that you didn't necessarily want to have. So my best advice, to remember literally nothing else that I said this entire evening, please remember this. Set your win number to win by a landslide. Give yourself a spectacular margin of victory as your goal. So to wrap up and review, your win number is calculated by figuring out the typical voter turnout percentage from past elections, and then applying that projected turnout rate to the current electorate, and identifying how many of the projected voters must vote for you in order for you to. So now that you know how to calculate the most important number that you will ever meet ever, at least the most important number for your campaign success, I'm going to turn it back over to Mondell so y'all can learn more about how to identify and engage your voter base so you can blow your win number out of the water on Election Day.
Thank you so much. I got to be honest here. My fear of following great trainers actually came true tonight, where they steal your thunder. It seems that is the case with Ruby and Steve. But instead of slighting it, I feel like the foundation for what I'm going to tell you has been set. So with that, Steve and Ruby, thank you so much for that information. And I hope everybody on the call gets notes, because what was articulated was the basis for creating the guiding star of your campaign. And also, you will need that information at the end of this call for our 2,000 question closed book test. I'm joking. There's no closed book test. However, the next one does add the who to Wizard Ruby's win number. We're going to dig into targeting and what it means to target. Targeting is building a smart pathway to victory. So you know where you're going to find those voters, who they are, where they are, and what message to convey to them. We do it because we have limited resources, time, and because we need to maximize all of these things, especially if we are progressive candidates taking an entrenched challenger or a well-funded machine. We do it because the American electorate is wide and diverse, and different voters care about different things. Targeting means we get the right message to the right voters so they can win, so that we can win on election day. If you don't have a working set of goals and targets, you can't build a field, communications, political endorsement, or finance strategy to win. This targeting is your guiding theory for how to win. There's a lot of points to consider in targeting. 4 of the most important: history, geography, constituency group, and modeling projections. Let us pretend for a moment that a political election is your family's way of handling conflicts. Let us say your family determines how things are done in the majority's decision. Let us also assume that you have a conflict in your family and that you are the oldest of 3 kids. And also in your household is your mother, your father, your grandmother, and your grandfather. So again, that is 7 total people to determine the outcome of any conflict. Let us say, because you are the first grandchild, your grandmother always sees things your way. Now let's say your mother is hip to your shenanigans, so she never sees things your way. And because your mother is your youngest sibling's favorite person in the entire world, he also never sees things your way. The same is true for your grandfather. Your mother is his big daughter, and in his eyes, she's always right. So he's always against you as well. Now let us pretend your middle sibling has a complex and flips on certain issues. So she could go either way. And your father, well, he's apathetic because it's football season, of course. If this was the case you found yourself in, you would have 2 definite votes for your conflict. In your grandmother's vote and your vote. You would have 3 definite votes against your conflict: your mother's vote, your grandfather's vote, and your youngest sibling's vote. A possible vote for or against you in your middle sibling, and then there's your father, who is set on never participating at all. This may seem like a complex algebra problem, and riddle only Steve Jobs could solve, but my progressive friends, this situation is the space we occupy when we decide to participate in electoral politics. Let us break down the roles of each family member and describe how we approach or organize each family member so as that we are successful when election day arrives. Let us start with our beloved grandmother for no other reason than she is super friendly to our cause. Politics, the grandmother is called. Base voters are the core group of people who can be counted on to support a campaign. An electoral campaign focuses on base voters. In every campaign, there's tons of talk about the base and which side will turn out base or whose base is excited about the candidate. A base voter can be defined according to geography, demography, shape, or shared experiences and or the basis of issues. An example of a geographic base would be the counties that make up Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. These counties voted overwhelmingly for President Obama twice, allowing him to carry the entire state of Virginia during both of his presidential elections. An example of a demographic base would be a group that votes similarly like the black vote, or maybe they vote similarly based on a specific issue, say environmentalists or pro-choice activists. These base voters support candidates and issues because they represent their values, interests, and point of view. We often make a mistake with regard to our base. We take the base for granted. It will always be there. And then we fail to nurture and develop its potential. In campaigns, this takes the form of failing to develop, utilize, and expand the campaign supporters. Campaigns often direct disproportionate amounts of energy and resources toward finicky or undecided voters, like our little sibling from the story, with very little attention given to base voters. We assume the base support, so we fail to engage the base. Let us go back to the family with the conflict. Imagine if you could decide or develop your grandmother's knowledge of your point of view. You heard her, well, he's my first grandchild, so I always agree with him, to a point of view where she can go out and advocate on your behalf. Think about how much more credible your conflict or issue is if your grandmother is making the argument, your finicky middle sibling, rather than you yourself. This not only frees up your time, but it also expands the campaign's appeal and reach. This mistake of taking the base for granted can lead to weak organizational efforts, disengaged constituents, and further, the loss of elections. For that reason, if progressives are to be successful, it is important to constantly focus on nurturing the base of people for our work. That base means actively engaging people in the work and giving them a role that builds their knowledge, strength, capacity, and skills. Building leadership in the participants will in turn expand the capacity of the campaign itself. Mary, my coworker, spoke of this in last week's night session. When attention is given to base building, passive supporters rapidly become active supporters and eventually key volunteers and or donors. Some of you may be asking, well, Mundell, how do we define the base in the first place? And the answer isn't one way. There are several ways. Most accurate would be to look at something called the voter file. A voter file contains information on the percentage of voters gone by different candidates and parties in previous elections, with detail even at the precinct and county levels. This information reveals a pattern over time of the voting preferences within defined geographical boundaries, letting the campaign know where its base strength is to be found. The slide that you're looking at on your screen is what I like to call one of the, and also a necessary in any campaign. The reason is because even though it is meant for good, it has for so long been used to neglect or justify not investing in communities of color. What I'm talking about is the Democratic Performance Index, or the DFA, as it is sometimes called. It is simply a simple percentage of the votes of any Democrat can expect in an average election, based on voters' history, not voter registration. Now, the advantage to this model or method is it is somewhat accurate. It is possible to very specifically determine a campaign's base voters where they live according to historical voting patterns. It is, however, worth noting that this isn't without disadvantages. A glaring disadvantage of this method is that it is based on who have already voted and is therefore a poor measurement of a potential the campaign has of bringing out new or disaffected voters, like, say, the father in our family analogy. Still yet, getting a copy of the voter file is well worth the effort. Once again, going to the family analogy, you will notice that I said earlier in my statement that your grandmother would go talk to your finicky middle sibling. This is because she has not yet made up her mind to oppose you, Although and even though she is highly likely to vote, she's still persuadable. I didn't say your grandmother should talk to your mother, your grandfather, or your youngest sibling, because it is a matter of fact that those that adequately oppose you will likely always do so. This is most of the time a waste of campaign's resources. I'm talking about trying to convince those that oppose you. Think about it as a scale of 100s. On one end, you have positive 100s. On the other end, you have negative 100s. And in the middle, you have 0. Let us pretend that you are the positive 100 and the family members that oppose you are the negative 100s. Even if you are able to move them 40 or 50 points, they are still strongly against you. Whereas if you are able to move the middle sibling, that's the one that's finicky or undecided, only 2 points, then she is already in your camp. This type of work requires less resources and makes it more efficient and victory more realistic. I feel like I need to say this. Talking to these voters is not a linear thing. It is not as if you automatically know who and where all your supporters are, or where and who is against you. It is to say, once a person has told you that they are against you, do not waste resources revisiting this person, because you run the risk of a couple things. One, wasting time trying to move these persons or people 50 points and still not convince them to vote for you. And in turn, you miss the opportunity to talk with potential supporters. Two, your continued effort to convince these people that they should vote for you might backfire and turn this person into a super volunteer for your opponent. So once a person has been identified either as a grandmother, which is your base, or a youngest sibling, which is your opposition, be sure to accurately track this information, for the grandmother will need to be talked to again during your get out the vote efforts, and the youngest sibling will never need to hear from you again. This is why your grandmother spend her time talking rather than the family members that oppose you. In politics, the middle sibling is the persuadable voter. As the name implies, a persuadable voter is one who can go either way, a voter who is not solidly committed to one candidate or the other as to make all efforts at persuasion futile. What I'm about to say may not sound intuitive, but listen closely, and I think it'll make sense. Persuadable voters are the opposite of base voters. Let me say it again. Persuadable voters are the opposite of base voters. Think about it this way. Base voters are staunch supporters, while persuadable voters are finicky or undecided, like the middle sibling in our family analogy. Rather than seeing one party as the embodiment of all virtue and the other party as a personification of evil, persuadable voters are drawn, or in some cases, repelled in both directions. Persuadable voters may like or dislike both candidates equally, or they may just be ambivalent. The important point is that voters in the middle of the scale are not convinced that one candidate is clearly superior to the other, i.e., persuadable voters. Hence, the persuadable voter will receive a disproportionate amount of attention from both campaigns. But even with a disproportionate amount of attention and convincing argument, there still exists a need to do more, just as Steve said. Imagine in our family scenario, you and your grandmother are able to convince your middle sibling to see things your way. This only brings you to 50% of the vote. Remember, Ruby said we need 50% plus 1 at least to have a successful campaign and an accurate win number. So as we stand right now, we don't have enough votes to get to our win number, counting on our base and those that we persuaded. So then we'll need to reach out to the Father. And in our family, the Father is the expanded universe. Though he is apathetic to the entire process, he never votes. He is the only pathway to victory. This, my friends, where we find ourselves in this country right now. At DFA, we have an idea that is essential to how we communicate eternally. That idea is that we assume the best of all of our coworkers' words and actions. I'm going to ask that of all of you right now. Know that whatever I say is to better our work and not offend anyone. America isn't the America of the old. Simply targeting white voters isn't the way forward. This is not how to win elections anymore. And doing so, we sacrifice winnable elections to preserving Republican. And we are guilty of doing this. The year after I was born, Ronald Reagan won 56% of the white vote and won with a landslide victory of 44 states. Now, if we fast forward just 32 years and Mitt Romney won 59% of the white vote and lost with only 24 states, if we listen to the talking heads tell us and what they tell us, we would believe that the white vote excitement about Mitt Romney was down or low. But this isn't the case. In actuality, 64% of whites voted in 2012 and only 59% voted in 1980 when Reagan won. I said all that to say that everyone here on this call, not excluding anyone, should value the idea of expanding the universe. Because as progressives, we all witnessed the magic of Bernie and his team's ability to expand the universe. Some of us were never on any candidate's list of super voters, prime voters, or considered high information voters. But because of a commitment made early on by Bernie's team and other organizations like DFA to the idea that democracy is broken until people have their voices heard, it is important that we create space so that all people can vote, can have the opportunity to do so. We saw this play out when Bernie insisted that every primary take place and that the D.C. voters have a chance to speak through their vote. We should call this process, or the new way of thinking, the new normal. This new normal isn't something you need a large organization like the Bernie's campaign to carry out. It does require a commitment to thinking through who you're going to talk to. This was the case last year when I was in Mississippi, assisting with the district attorney's race. The Republican incumbent was a West Allgood, whom had been in the seat 27 years. And we were a 34-year-old black male named Scott Cologne, who was a first-time candidate. When I tell you the likelihood of us winning was slim, I mean it was slim. But the reason the likelihood of us winning was slim was because initially the thought was that we needed to talk to the traditional voters, those that had voted in 3 of the last 4 elections, those that were considered high information. When I got to Mississippi, Scott Cologne was down by more than 20 points. And I insisted that we needed to spend our time redefining who our base was going to be in that election. So we decided that we would spend some time educating so-called sporadic voters, voters like the father in our analogy, and explaining the importance of Scott Cologne and the horrors of Forrest Allgood, telling these so-called low-information voters that Allgood was really all bad. He was responsible for sentencing a 13-year-old child to life in prison based on an inhumane confession coerced from the child while his mother was beating on the door of the confession room and screaming, "Don't talk to my son without me." Telling voters that Allgood was responsible for keeping a mentally challenged man in county jail for more than 11 years without a trial. Telling voters how he locked up an 18-year-old mentally challenged mother for murdering her own child when it's been said different. Thank God the Supreme Court of Mississippi eventually overturned this election. Unfortunately, this case, unfortunately, it wasn't before the mother was able to make it to her child's funeral. Let me tell you, when we started having these conversations with the so-called low-information voters, almost immediately, these people turned into canvassers, phone bankers, volunteers, donors, and they became the new significance of our base. To make a long story long, Scott Cologne defeated a 27-year incumbent in a race that no one thought was winnable, not even some of his donors. And this only happened because of a commitment to the new normal, a normal that not only reaches out to those that voted in the 3 of the 4 last elections, but also to those that hadn't voted in 10 years. A NORML that not only reaches out to those that the party label as activists, but also to those that need to be registered to vote. In the election in East Mississippi, the black vote outperformed the white vote. The so-called sporadic vote was able to elect the first black district attorney in the district, which just so happened to be a majority white district. This, people, is the revolution. If this revolution is to be real, then we are obligated to think beyond old flawed party strategies and realize that the traditional democratic idea of supervoter isn't enough to power the electoral revolution that we are all responsible for building. This revolution must rely on a serious expansion of what is normal. These night schools by DFA will continue to give the foundation, but your attendance, your commitment is required. Thank you all for your time this evening. I am Mondell Robinson, and with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Excellent. Fantastic points. Thank you, Mondell. What you said about how many of us Bernies aren't even on any consultant's voter turnout model. It really says a lot about how important it is that we expand our targets to the new electorate. All right, now this call has been fantastic, and we're running out of time. But let's make sure we get a few of our great questions that are coming in online answered. So for this first question, I'm going to ask Annie Weinberg, DFA's electoral director, to answer it. So Annie, the question is turnout during this year's primary election a good predictor of the general election?
That is a great question. Thanks to the folks who asked. Thanks, Mondell and Ruby, for that very informative briefing. So I think that you can learn a lot of things from a round of primary elections. Based on what Mondell described, we saw that this year, in many ways through the Bernie Sanders campaign, a whole new swath of the electorate were engaged in organizing. So that's often a good indicator if turnout is very high and energized in a primary, that there may be similar dynamics happening in the general. But across the board, the other answer is that it depends. It depends on the candidate. It depends on the depth of the organizing that we're doing as progressives in our communities. It depends on how and how long we've invested in that organizing and that communication. So there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to that. There's definitely lots of things that we can learn about overall trends in a primary as impacting what's going to happen in the general election. So
that makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate that. Let's make the second question be for Ruby. Ruby, should you adjust your win number throughout the race?
That's a great question. Thank you. So I would say you can always make your win number bigger, right? Anytime you can decide you want to win by a bigger margin, you want to contact even more voters. I would recommend not decreasing your win number unless you're facing some kind of dire circumstances. But there are some times where you're definitely going to change your win number throughout the span of your campaign. One would be going from a primary election to a general election. You are definitely going to have a different win number for your primary than you do for the general. You also are probably going to want to recalculate your win number if additional candidates join your race or if people drop out of your race. So if you're in a council race with 3 total candidates, right, yourself and 2 other people, and one of them drops out, that drastically changes your win number and actually makes it considerably bigger. So you are definitely going to want to recalculate if the playing field changes. And if any other new information comes to light about your electorate, you might want to revise your win number based on what you know now that you didn't know when you initially calculated it. So thanks. Great question.
Fantastic. And to keep this moving, let's give a question. Del, Mike wrote in. He wanted to know, what factors have you identified that really increased turnout?
Information. There are studies that show, Charlie, even with a little information, we can save so much money as progressives if we take it off of TV and spend it on human and put it on capital and give voters more credit than we do. So, just talking to voters in a real manner, having real conversations at doors will change voter turnout.
That makes a lot of sense. We've seen it over and over again, year after year, that face-to-face conversations, direct door canvassing is the single most powerful and impactful way to reach out to people. And that just makes sense because people get their questions answered. You'll be able to impart the information they need to know. I think that's fantastic. So these have all been great questions. I think this has been a solid training, and we're just about out of time for tonight. So let's bring Annie Weinberg back on to tell us about the next steps and to build on these skills and win. Annie, wrap it up for us.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So as Charlie said, we are wrapping up in terms of our time for tonight's training, but I see a few questions. I want to just address them. We will be sending out the slide deck after this with notes. We'll also be sending out a debrief survey so that you can give feedback to all of us so that we keep building these curriculum, that we can keep growing the night school program and make them better and better. And so please check for those in your inbox. Again, we will be sending out these materials and a survey after the training, so please look for that. I want to also say that we are going to continue these trainings throughout the coming weeks, all the way through until September 7th. We have night schools scheduled throughout the coming months so that we can keep building these key campaign skills in fundraising, in media, in voter targeting, in field organizing, and more. So next up, there's two big things I want to highlight that are happening next week. Next week, on August 24th, we're excited to pile on to kick off the next phase of Bernie Sanders' organization, Our Revolution, which is going to help elect progressives all over the country. That's happening next week, Wednesday, August 24th. So that means that our night school is definitely still happening next week, marketers. It'll be on Thursday, August 25th at 9 p.m. Eastern, so same time, same place, except on Thursday. And next week we'll be discussing creating a powerful narrative, authentic, values-driven storytelling on the campaign trail, thinking through some of the components of what makes a narrative clear, compelling, and true. You can find out more at www.democracyforamerica.com/trainings. Again, that's www.democracyforamerica.com/trainings. We'll continue updating the website as we add modules because the response to this night school has been overwhelming. There are progressives all over the country who are ready to run for office themselves, ready to organize in their communities to build the progressive pipeline and elect leaders up and down the ballot in all 50 states, from dog catcher to president, and it's truly inspiring. You can ask questions if you have them at training@democracyforamerica.com. And again, we will work as hard as we can to get back to everybody. Again, that email address is training@democracyforamerica.com. Join us next week for the kickoff of Our Revolution. You can sign up for those events at berniesanders.com. And join us on Thursday of next week for a session on creating a powerful narrative, authentic, values-driven storytelling on the campaign trail at 9 p.m. Eastern. And you can look for updates and for more materials at www.democracyforamerica.com/training. So thank you all so much again. Together with Montel and Ruby and Charlie and with Steve Phillips, the author of Brown is the New White, we can help build this political revolution up and down the ballot and build a more reflective democracy. So thank you so much again, and have a great night.